The sun hung low over the Arizona territory, painting the endless expanse of red dust and scrub brush in shades of copper and rust. In the distance, the jagged peaks of the Superstition Mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. The wind carried the scent of sage and the promise of another scorching day ahead. Lily Morgan stood on the porch of her modest ranch house, her calloused hands wrapped around a tin cup of bitter coffee. The steam rose and dissipated quickly in the dry air. At 26, she was already a widow, her sun-weathered face bearing lines that spoke of grief and hardship rather than age. Her blonde hair, once her pride, was now pulled back in a practical bun, streaked with premature silver from the stress of survival. The ranch stretched before her, 40 acres of stubborn land that her late husband, Thomas, had claimed 3 years ago with dreams of cattle and prosperity. Now it held only a vegetable garden she tended with fierce determination, a small herd of goats, and a chicken coop that needed constant repair from coyote raids. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles east, and the town of Copper Creek lay a full day's ride north. She had buried Thomas 13 months ago, after bandits ambushed him on the road back from selling their only bull. The townspeople had helped with the burial, their faces sympathetic but distant. Since then, their sympathy had curdled into something else, disapproval that she remained here alone, whispers that she should sell the land and marry the blacksmith's son or the aging merchant who'd already buried 2 wives. But Lily stayed. This land was all she had left of Thomas, of the life they'd planned together. Every sunset she watched from this porch was one he'd never see. Every morning she woke in their bed alone was a small victory against the crushing weight of solitude. The wolves came at night. She could hear them prowling the perimeter, testing for weakness. She'd learned to sleep with the Winchester rifle beside her bed, to recognize the difference between the wind and footsteps on the porch. The isolation that the townspeople feared had become her armor. Out here, she answered to no one's expectations but her own. 3 months ago, that careful solitude had been shattered. She'd found him collapsed near the goat pen at dawn, his shirt dark with blood, his face gray as ash. A stranger, tall and lean, with dark hair matted to his skull and a week's worth of beard shadowing his jaw. Her first instinct had been to run for the rifle. Her second, seeing the shallow rise and fall of his chest, had been something she still couldn't name. Maybe it was the way his hand clutched a worn photograph, even in unconsciousness. Maybe it was the fever words he mumbled, not curses or threats, but a child's name repeated like a prayer. Sarah, I'm sorry. Sarah. Against every shred of common sense, she dragged him to the root cellar beneath the house. It had taken all her strength and most of the morning, leaving drag marks in the dust that she carefully obscured with a rake. The cellar was cool and dark, meant for storing preserves and potatoes through the brutal summer. She'd made him a pallet of old blankets and tended his wounds. A bullet graze along his ribs, another deeper wound in his shoulder, various cuts and bruises that spoke of a hard flight through rough country. For 3 days he burned with fever while she dripped water between his cracked lips and changed his bandages. She told no one, made her weekly trip to town as usual, smiled tightly when Mrs. Henderson asked if she'd heard about the dangerous outlaw the marshals were hunting, a man named Caleb Cross, wanted for the murder of a family up near Flagstaff. On the 4th day, his eyes opened. They were gray as storm clouds, sharp with intelligence despite the pain. He'd tried to reach for a weapon that wasn't there, then stilled when he realized he was at her mercy. "You fixing to turn me in?" His voice was rough as sandpaper. "I'm fixing to keep you from dying on my clean floor," she'd replied, surprised by her own steadiness. "After that, we'll see." The first week had been tense as a held breath. He'd been too weak to be a threat, but she'd kept the rifle close anyway. She brought him food, beans and cornbread, goat's milk when she could spare it. He ate mechanically, watching her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his prison. They barely spoke beyond the necessary. She learned his name was indeed Caleb, though he volunteered nothing else. He learned only what he could observe, that she lived alone, that she was competent with both rifle and knife, that she locked the cellar door each night but always left him water and a chamber pot. By the second week, infection had set in. She'd found him delirious again, his wounds angry and red. This time, she didn't hesitate. She'd seen Thomas doctor injured cattle, knew the basics of cleaning wounds and making poultices. She worked through the night, fighting the infection with whiskey, honey, and herbs from her garden. When he grabbed her wrist in his delirium, his grip was surprisingly gentle. "Don't let them take me back," he'd muttered. "Can't go back to that place." She'd smoothed the sweat-damp hair from his forehead, a gesture so unconsciously tender it had shocked her. "Hush now. You're safe here." The word safe had tasted strange on her tongue. Was any place truly safe for either of them? Slowly, grudgingly, he'd recovered. She'd expected sullenness, maybe violence when his strength returned. Instead, she'd found him attempting to repair a broken shelf in the cellar with a piece of wire and determination. "No call for that," she'd said. He'd looked up at her, and, for the first time, she'd seen something besides wariness in his eyes. A man pays his debts. "You don't owe me anything, don't I?" He gestured to his healing wounds. "Most folks would have left me for the buzzards. Or worse, collected the bounty." She'd thought of Thomas then, dying alone on a dusty road with no one to hold his hand. "I'm not most folks." A ghost of a smile had touched his lips. "No, ma'am. I'm beginning to see that." As the weeks passed, an odd routine developed. She'd bring him meals, and he'd tell her about the damage he'd noticed around the property. Loose boards, gaps in the fence, signs of termite damage in the support beams. His knowledge of construction surprised her until he mentioned working as a carpenter before. Before whatever had led him to this moment, she found herself lingering longer during these visits. He was educated, she realized, his speech careful and precise when he forgot to roughen it. He knew Shakespeare and could recite poetry, though he reddened when she caught him at it. Gradually, the cellar began to feel less like a prison and more like a refuge, for both of them. One evening, she'd brought him coffee instead of water. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute she usually drank. His hands had wrapped around the cup like it was precious gold. "Why?" he'd asked simply. She'd considered lying, making up some excuse about having extra. Instead, she'd told the truth. "It's my birthday." His eyes had softened. "How old?" 26. "Too young to be a widow, too young to be this alone." The words had hung between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. She'd fled then, locking the door with shaking hands. But that night, she'd heard him singing softly, a lullaby, sweet and sad. She'd pressed her ear to the floor above and let the tears come for the first time in months. Now, 3 months after finding him, she stood on her porch in the dying light, wrestling with a truth that grew heavier each day. The man in her cellar was supposed to be a monster, a killer of innocence. But the man who'd insisted on mending her broken furniture, who'd taught her a better way to bank the stove for cold nights, who'd shared his meager biscuit with a mouse he'd named Frederick, that man didn't match the wanted posters. A howl rose from the desert, long and mournful. The wolves were early tonight. Lily checked the loads in her rifle and prepared to descend to the cellar. It was time for his supper, and she'd made stew with fresh rabbit. She'd even baked cornbread, though she told herself it was simply to use up the cornmeal before it went bad. As she lifted the cellar door, she caught sight of movement on the horizon. Riders, perhaps, or just the heat mirages that plagued the desert at twilight. Either way, it sent a chill down her spine. The world had a way of intruding on even the most careful isolation. She descended into the darkness, where a complicated man waited in the shadows, and where her simple life had become something she no longer recognized. The smart thing would be to send him away, to return to her safe, predictable loneliness. But Lily Morgan had stopped doing the smart thing 3 months ago, when she'd chosen mercy over sense, and deep in her heart, in a place she didn't yet dare examine, she knew she was no longer sure which of them was truly the prisoner. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Lily watched Caleb work on the broken fence post near the eastern pasture. He'd emerged from the cellar 2 weeks ago, when she'd finally decided the risk of keeping him underground outweighed the risk of discovery. The decision had come after finding him nearly unconscious from the stifling heat, the cellar having become an oven in the brutal summer temperatures. "You'll work nights," she'd told him firmly. "Sleep in the barn during the day. If anyone comes, I know how to disappear." He'd finished quietly. Now he moved with practiced efficiency, his hands sure on the tools she'd unearthed from Thomas's old chest. The shoulder wound still troubled him. She could see it in the careful way he lifted his arm, but he worked steadily, methodically. He'd already repaired the chicken coop, reinforced the well cover, and patched 3 holes in the barn roof. She brought him water, approaching slowly as she'd learned to do. Quick movements still made him tense, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he no longer carried. "You'll work yourself into the ground," she said, offering the ladle. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "Better than sitting idle." He drank deeply, then studied her face. "You look tired." She almost laughed. When didn't she look tired? "The wolves were bold last night." "Came right up to the goat pen." His expression darkened. "I heard them. Wanted to help, but you need to stay hidden." She took back the empty ladle. "I managed. You always do." There was something in his voice, a note of admiration mixed with concern. "Doesn't mean you should have to." They stood there in the morning heat, the weight of unspoken things heavy between them. 3 months of careful distance, of measured words and avoided glances, and still she felt the pull of him like the moon on the tide. "Tell me about the family," she said suddenly, surprising them both. "The one they say you killed." His whole body went rigid. For a moment, she thought he'd walk away, retreat into the silence that was his fortress. Instead, he sat heavily on a nearby rock, his hands clasped between his knees. "The Danforth family. A father, mother, 3 children." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Found shot in their beds. House burned after—" I'd been hunting their neighbor, Jake Morrison, for cattle rustling. Had a bounty letter and everything proper. But Morrison had friends, powerful ones. When I brought him in, he was out in 2 days. Next thing I knew, the Danforths were dead, and there was a witness saying he saw me leaving their ranch that night. Lily settled onto the ground near him, smoothing her skirts. The witness lied. The witness was Morrison's cousin. Caleb picked up a stick, broke it between his fingers. By the time I heard about the murders, there was already a posse forming. I ran, made me look guilty as sin, but I knew how frontier justice works. They'd have strung me up before I could say a word. And the real killer? Morrison, most likely. The Danforths had been planning to testify against him in a land dispute trial. He looked at her then, his gray eyes bleak. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Mrs. Morgan brought in men who probably didn't deserve their fate. But I never killed a child. Never killed anyone who wasn't trying to kill me first." She believed him. It should have frightened her, how easily she believed him. But his pain was too raw to be false. "It's Lily," she said softly. "Just Lily." Something shifted in his expression. "Lily." He said it like he was tasting the word. "That's not safe. Getting familiar with a wanted man." "Nothing about this is safe." She stood, brushing dust from her hands. "Come, I'll show you what needs fixing in the barn." They worked side by side through the morning, speaking little but finding a rhythm together. He was teaching her as he worked, she realized, showing her how to spot wood rot, how to brace a sagging beam, how to mix mud and straw for chinking gaps. Knowledge she'd need when he was gone. The thought sat like a stone in her chest. When the sun reached its zenith, she retreated to the house while he found shade in the barn. She tried to nap but couldn't settle, her mind turning over their conversation. Through the window, she could see the barn door slightly ajar, knew he was watching even as he rested, guarding her even as she guarded him. The next evening brought rain, sudden and violent as only desert storms could be. She'd been checking the goats when the sky opened, soaking her through in seconds. She ran for the house but slipped in the sudden mud, going down hard on one knee. Strong hands caught her arms, lifted her. Caleb had materialized from nowhere, his own clothes already drenched. You hurt? No, Lightning split the sky. Thunder following immediately. The goats bleated in terror. Without speaking, they worked together to herd the animals into the barn. The rain came sideways, stinging like needles. She could barely see, but somehow Caleb was always there, steadying her when she stumbled, catching a goat that tried to bolt, his presence solid and sure in the chaos. Finally, soaked and muddy, they got the last animal secured. They stood in the barn doorway, catching their breath, watching the rain turn the yard into a lake. She was shivering, her dress plastered to her skin. Her hair escaped from its pins and hanging in wet ropes. Here, he shrugged out of his coat, barely drier than her dress but warm from his body, and draped it around her shoulders. His hands lingered a moment, and she became acutely aware of how close they stood, how she could feel the heat of him despite the cold rain. "You'll freeze," she protested. "I've been colder." His thumb brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek, the touch so gentle it made her chest tight. "You need to get inside. Change into something dry." But she didn't move. Neither did he. The storm raged around them, but in the shelter of the barn doorway, there was a different kind of electricity. His hand was still at her face, and she found herself leaning into the touch. "Lily." Her name was a warning, a plea. "I know," she whispered. He stepped back, the loss of his warmth immediate. "Go on, I'll bank the fire in here. Make sure the animals settle." She went, but at the door of the house, she turned back. He stood watching her through the rain, a dark figure against the golden light of the barn. She raised her hand, and after a moment, he did the same, inside. She stripped off her wet things with shaking hands that had nothing to do with cold. She'd been alone so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to want someone's touch, to crave the solid presence of another person. Thomas had been gentle, sweet, predictable. Caleb was none of those things. He was dangerous and complicated and possibly doomed. And still she wanted. She cut off the thought, dressed in dry clothes, built up the fire. But when she looked out the window and saw the barn door still open, saw him keeping watch in the storm, she knew she was lying to herself. The next days passed in a new tension. They still worked together, still shared meals and conversation. But now there was an awareness that hadn't been there before. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unguarded for just a moment before he looked away. Once, passing in the narrow barn aisle, their bodies brushed, and they both froze before carefully stepping apart. He started leaving small things for her to find. A wild flower on the porch rail, a perfectly round stone placed on the kitchen step, a wooden whistle he'd carved for calling the goats, never handed directly to her, always left where she'd discover them like secrets. One evening, she found him sitting behind the barn, sketching on a piece of old board with a charred stick. He tried to hide it when he saw her, but she'd already glimpsed the image. Two figures standing close, faces turned toward each other. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I shouldn't." "May I see it?" Reluctantly, he handed over the board. The drawing was rough but somehow captured something essential. The woman's strength despite her small frame, the man's protective stance, the space between them that seemed to pulse with possibility. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's foolish." He took the board back, made to throw it aside, but she caught his wrist. "Please, keep it." Their eyes met and held. His wrist was warm under her fingers, his pulse rapid, slowly, carefully. He turned his hand to interlock their fingers, just for a moment, just long enough for her to feel the calluses from years of hard work, the gentle strength in his grip. Then voices carried on the wind, riders approaching from the main road. They sprang apart, Caleb melting into the shadows with practiced ease, while Lily walked calmly toward the house, smoothing her hair, preparing her widow's mask. The riders passed without stopping, heading toward town. But the moment was broken, the danger reasserted. That night, she left his supper at the barn door without speaking, and he didn't call her back. Yet later, lying in her too-empty bed, She held the wooden whistle he'd made and wondered if a heart could break from wanting something it could never have. Outside, she knew he was keeping watch, protecting her even as he kept his distance. She pressed the whistle to her lips but didn't blow it, afraid of what might happen if he came to the sound. In the darkness, the storm inside her raged on, far more dangerous than any desert tempest. The days grew shorter as autumn crept across the desert, bringing cool nights and the promise of winter. Lily found herself dreading the cold less this year, knowing she wouldn't face it entirely alone. The knowledge both comforted and tormented her. She was returning from the well one morning when she found it, a swing fashioned from rope and an old board, hanging from the large cottonwood tree beside the house. The rope was new, traded for somehow. The board sanded smooth. She stood staring at it, bucket forgotten at her feet. "Every house needs a swing," Caleb said from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. "Thomas was going to make you one." She turned, startled. "How did you—" "Found his plans in the barn, tucked behind some old leather." He shifted uncomfortably. "Shouldn't have looked, but I was searching for hinges and—" He trailed off, then gestured at the swing. "Thought maybe you'd like it anyway." Tears pricked her eyes. She'd forgotten about Thomas's promise of a swing, made during their first week here when she'd mentioned missing the one from her childhood home, that Caleb had found those plans and quietly fulfilled them. "Try it," he urged gently. She settled onto the board, testing. The rope held firm, the height perfect. When she pushed off gently, the motion was smooth, carrying her back to simpler times. A laugh escaped her, surprising them both. "I haven't done this in years." She pumped her legs, going higher. The morning sun caught her face. The breeze lifted her hair, and for a moment she felt young again, free, when she finally slowed. Caleb was smiling, a real smile that transformed his usually guarded face. "You should do that more often. Swing. Laugh." The words hung between them like the morning mist. She dismounted carefully, smoothing her skirts, aware of his eyes on her. "Thank you for this. It's nothing. It's not nothing." She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "It's the kindest thing anyone's done for me since—" She stopped, unable to finish. His hand rose as if to touch her cheek, then fell. "Lily, we can't—" "I know." But she didn't step back. "I know all the reasons why we can't. I recite them to myself every night. You're wanted. I'm a widow. The town already whispers about me. You'll have to leave eventually. I know." "Then why?" "Because knowing and feeling are two different things." The words tumbled out, unstoppable now. "Because I'm tired of being sensible. Because when you look at me, I don't feel like the tragic widow Morgan anymore. I feel like—" She broke off, heat flooding her cheeks. "Like what?" His voice was rough. "Like a woman." The confession lay bare between them. Caleb's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was strained. "You think I don't feel it too? You think I don't lie awake wanting things I have no right to want? What do you want?" The question was barely a whisper. Instead of answering with words, he cupped her face in his hands, calloused thumbs gentle against her skin. His eyes searched hers, asking permission. In response, she rose on her toes, closing the distance between them. The kiss was careful at first, tentative, as if they both might shatter. Then her hands found his shoulders, and his arms came around her waist, and careful became something else entirely. Months of denial, of careful distance, dissolved in the space between heartbeats. She tasted coffee and desperation, felt the barely restrained power in his embrace, the way he held her like she was both precious and necessary. When they broke apart, breathing hard, she kept her eyes closed, afraid of what she might see in his face. Regret, perhaps, or worse, pity. "Look at me." His forehead rested against hers. "Lily, look at me." She opened her eyes to find his face inches away, his expression raw with emotion. "This is dangerous," he said. "Everything about you is dangerous. I mean it. If someone saw, no one saw." She pulled back slightly but kept her hands on his shoulders. "We're 15 miles from anywhere. The only witnesses are the goats." Despite everything, he huffed a laugh. "This isn't a joke." "I'm not joking." She sobered, meeting his eyes steadily. "I'm choosing. For the first time since Thomas died, I'm choosing something for myself. Not what the town expects, not what's proper or safe. What I want. And you want a broken-down bounty hunter with a price on his head. I want the man who makes me whistle for my goats, who leaves me flowers and teaches me carpentry, who guards my sleep even though I never asked him to." She touched his face, feeling the rasp of stubble. "I want you, Caleb Cross. God help me." He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. "I've got nothing to offer you, no future, no promises." "I'm not asking for promises." She stepped back, suddenly needing distance to think clearly. I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel." That evening, they shared supper in the kitchen instead of her leaving it at the barn. It should have been awkward after the morning's confession, but somehow it wasn't. They talked of small things, the goats' antics, plans for winterizing the house, whether the old apple tree might fruit next year. Normal conversation, but underscored with new awareness. When darkness fell, he rose to leave as always. At the door, he paused. "That swing," he said, not looking at her. "Thomas had good ideas. He loved you, right?" "He did," she agreed softly. "But he's gone, and I'm still here." Caleb nodded slowly, then disappeared into the night. 3 days later, she woke to the sound of hammering. Through the window, she could see him working on something near the side of the house. By the time she dressed and emerged, he'd constructed a simple bench, positioned to catch the morning sun. "Figured you might like somewhere to sit with your coffee," he explained, not meeting her eyes. She tested it, found it solid and comfortable. "It's perfect. Good." He gathered his tools, started to leave, but she caught his sleeve. "Stay. Just sit with me a while." He hesitated, then settled beside her, careful to leave space between them. They sat in silence, watching the sun paint the desert gold. A roadrunner darted past, chasing some invisible prey. The world felt vast and empty and full of possibility. "I had a wife," Caleb said suddenly. "Before, her name was Mary." Lily's hands tightened on her coffee cup, but she didn't speak. "Married her when I was 20. She was everything soft and good in the world. Couldn't boil water without burning it, but Lord, she could sing. Used to fill our little house with music." His voice was distant, lost in memory. "The fever took her our second winter, her and the baby she was carrying." "I'm sorry," Lily whispered. "After that, I couldn't stay in one place. Took up hunting bounties because it meant always moving, never having to think too hard about what I'd lost." He rubbed his face. "Been running ever since. I guess even before Morrison framed me." "Is that what you think you're doing here? Running?" He turned to look at her then, his expression unguarded. "No. For the first time in 8 years, I'm not running. That's what scares me." She reached over, covered his hand with hers. "Me too." They sat that way until the coffee grew cold, hands linked, sharing the weight of their fears. When he finally rose to return to his work, he squeezed her fingers gently before letting go. That night, she made apple cider with the last of the previous year's dried fruit, spiking it with a precious bit of whiskey from Thomas's hidden bottle. They drank it by the fire, sitting on the floor with their backs against the settle, shoulders touching. The whiskey made her bold. Or perhaps it was the way firelight danced in his eyes, the way his sleeve brushed hers with each movement. She found herself leaning into him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder as if it belonged there. "This is nice," she murmured. His arm came around her, hesitant at first, then settling when she didn't pull away. "Yeah, it is. Tell me something good. Something from before everything went wrong." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I had a dog once, ugly thing, all ears and attitude. Found him half dead outside a saloon in Tombstone, nursed him back, and he followed me for 3 years. Smart as a whip, used to steal biscuits right out of my saddlebags, then looked so innocent I'd think I was going crazy. She smiled against his shoulder. What happened to him? Left him with a family in Tucson when I started hunting Morrison. Didn't want him getting hurt. His voice roughened. Still miss that damn dog. Maybe when this is over, you can get him back. Maybe? But they both heard the doubt in it. When this was over, whatever that meant, would likely involve rope or lead, not reunions with old pets. The fire burned low. She should bank it. Should send him back to the barn. Should do 100 sensible things. Instead, she turned in his arms, studying his face in the dying light. I don't want you to go back to the barn tonight. His whole body tensed. Lily, I know what I'm asking. She touched his face, traced the line of a scar on his temple. I'm not a blushing girl. I buried my husband. I know life is short and uncertain and that tomorrow isn't promised. I want whatever time we have. You deserve better than stolen moments with a doomed man. Maybe, but you're what I choose. He searched her face for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, drew her closer. This kiss was different from the first, deeper, charged with decision. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise and pain in equal measure. You sure? He asked roughly. In answer, she stood, extending her hand. After a heartbeat, he took it, rising to follow her toward the stairs. At the bedroom door, the room she'd shared with Thomas, she paused. Then, with quiet determination, she led him instead to the small spare room, with its narrow bed and clean quilts. A new space for whatever this was between them. Later, lying entwined in the darkness, she traced patterns on his chest while he played with her unbound hair. The urgency had passed, leaving something tender in its wake. Real. No regrets? He asked softly. She pressed a kiss to the scar on his shoulder, the one from the bullet that had brought him to her. None. You? His arms tightened around her. Only that I can't give you the life you deserve. Let me worry about what I deserve. She yawned, exhaustion pulling at her. For now, just be here. For now, he agreed, and she chose not to hear the sorrow in it. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with the promise of change coming. But inside the small room, wrapped in warmth and each other, they held the future at bay for one more night. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. It always did in this hard land. But tonight, they had this. Skin and breath and heartbeats aligned, two broken people finding wholeness in the shelter of each other's arms. When morning came, it would all seem impossible again. But for now, in the darkness, anything felt within reach. Dawn came too soon, pale light creeping through the curtains like an unwelcome guest. Lily woke slowly, aware first of warmth, then of the solid presence beside her. For a moment, she allowed herself the luxury of pretending this was normal, waking beside someone who belonged there, who had every right to share her mornings. But Caleb was already awake, tension singing through his body despite his stillness. She knew he was listening, cataloging sounds, ready to move at the first sign of danger. Even in peace, he couldn't fully let down his guard. It's all right, she murmured against his chest. Just the wind. His hand smoothed her hair. Sorry, old habits. How long have you been awake? A while. He shifted slightly, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. Watching you sleep, trying to memorize. He stopped abruptly. Don't. She pushed up on one elbow to look at him. Don't talk like you're already gone. His eyes were shadowed in the dim light. We both know I can't stay forever. I know, but not today. Today you're here, and that's enough. He studied her face, then pulled her down for a kiss that tasted of promise and sorrow intertwined. When they finally rose and dressed, moving around each other with new intimacy, the day felt charged with possibility and dread in equal measure. At breakfast, Caleb pushed eggs around his plate. Distracted. Finally, he set down his fork. Found something yesterday, when I was fixing the fence by the wash. Lily's blood chilled at his tone. What kind of something? He pulled a dirty handkerchief from his pocket, unfolded it on the table. Inside lay a brass button, military style, and a scrap of red fabric. These were caught on the mesquite, fresh caught. The fabric's not sun-faded yet. Could be from anyone passing through, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Could be. He rewrapped the items carefully. But there were boot prints, too. 3, maybe 4 men. They circled back toward town after scouting the property line. When? 2 days ago, near as I can tell. His jaw tightened. About the time those riders passed on the road. Lily forced herself to think calmly. The Brewster gang's been hitting ranches up north. Maybe they're scouting for easy targets. Maybe. But they both heard what went unspoken. Maybe someone had finally tracked Caleb here. Or maybe the town's patience with the stubborn widow Morgan had finally run out. Either way, trouble was circling like buzzards over a dying animal. We should prepare, Caleb said quietly. I'll dig some defensive positions. Set up. No. The word came out sharper than intended. This is my home. I won't turn it into a fortress. Lily. But, she continued, we can be smart about it. Check the weapons, stock ammunition. Maybe move some supplies to the root cellar in case... She couldn't finish the sentence. They spent the morning in tense preparation. Caleb cleaned and oiled every firearm on the property, taught her how to load Thomas's old Navy Colt she'd never touched. She gathered medical supplies, filled every container with water, tried not to think about why they might need either. As the sun reached its peak, he disappeared with a shovel, returning hours later covered in dirt. Dug some spider holes, he explained at her questioning look. Places to take cover if needed, and ran some trip lines with empty cans. We'll hear anyone approaching at night. She wanted to protest the militarization of her peaceful ranch, but the set of his jaw stopped her. He was doing what he knew, using skills learned in harder times to protect what mattered. That she had become something worth protecting made her chest tight with emotion. That evening, Lily made a decision. She hitched up the wagon despite Caleb's protests. I'm going to town tomorrow, she announced, acting normal. If I hide, it'll just make people more suspicious. It's too dangerous. It's more dangerous to break routine. She softened her tone. I'll be careful. See if anyone's asking questions. Gauge the mood. He clearly hated it, but recognized the wisdom. I'm coming with you. You can't, not into town, but I'll shadow you. Stay close enough to help if needed. His expression brooked no argument. That's the deal. Or you don't go at all. She might have bristled at his tone a week ago. Now she just nodded, understanding the fear beneath the command. All right. That night, they made love with desperate tenderness, each touch a promise, each kiss a plea for more time. Afterward, Caleb held her tight, his chin resting on her head. If something happens tomorrow, nothing will happen. But her voice shook slightly. If it does, he continued firmly, promise me you'll run. Don't try to protect me. Don't make some noble stand. Just run. Caleb, promise me. His voice was fierce. I can face whatever comes as long as I know you're safe. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, only if you promise the same. If things go bad, you run. Don't sacrifice yourself for my reputation or some misguided sense of honor. That's different. No, it's not. She pulled back to look at him. My life's not worth more than yours. If we do this, we do it as equals, or not at all. He searched her face in the darkness, then nodded slowly. Equals. They sealed it with a kiss that felt too much like goodbye. Morning came cloudy and oppressive, the air thick with the promise of storm. Lily dressed carefully in her most respectable outfit, the black dress that marked her as a proper widow, the bonnet that hid her face. Looking in the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman who'd spent the night tangled in passion with an outlaw. You look like a stranger, Caleb said from the doorway, echoing her thoughts. That's the idea. She pinned her hair severely, erasing any sign of the woman who'd let it flow loose over bare shoulders. "The widow Morgan is above reproach. I prefer Lily," he said softly. "So do I." She turned from the mirror. "But she can't go to town?" The ride was tense, though nothing seemed amiss. Caleb stayed true to his word, invisible but present, a guardian shadow in the rocks above the road. Lily forced herself to drive normally, even humming a little tune as if she hadn't a care beyond the price of flour. Copper Creek looked the same as always. Dusty streets, familiar storefronts, dogs sleeping in patches of shade, but something felt different. Too many eyes following her progress, too many conversations stopping as she passed. At the general store, Mrs. Henderson greeted her with unusual coolness. "Mrs. Morgan, haven't seen you in a spell. Just the usual supplies. Please." Lily kept her voice pleasant, handing over her list. As Mrs. Henderson gathered items, she chattered with forced brightness. "That trouble up north has everyone on edge. 3 ranches hit just this week. The Brewster boys. They're saying, though some wonder if it might be that outlaw they never caught. What was his name? Cross?" Lily's hand stayed steady through sheer force of will. "I wouldn't know. I keep to myself." Mrs. Henderson's eyes were sharp. "Maybe too much to yourself. If you don't mind my saying, not natural, a young woman alone so long. People talk. People always talk." Lily counted out coins carefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson." But as she loaded her wagon, she noticed the sheriff watching from his office doorway, and 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize lounging near the saloon, their eyes tracking her movements. The skin between her shoulder blades itched. She was halfway home when the storm broke, rain coming in sheets that turned the road to mud. Lightning split the sky. Thunder following close. The horses shied, and she fought to control them, grateful for the storm's cover even as it complicated everything. A rider emerged from the rocks ahead. Not Caleb. She knew instantly. Too heavy in the saddle, moving wrong. Her hand found the pistol hidden in her skirts. But the rider passed with just a tip of his hat, continuing toward town. Still, her heart hammered as she urged the horses faster, desperate to reach home. Caleb met her at the gate, materializing from the storm like something mythical. Water streamed from his hat as he helped her down, his eyes scanning her for injury. "I'm fine," she assured him, then told him about the town's mood. The watching men, Mrs. Henderson's pointed questions. His face grew grimmer with each word. They know something, maybe not what, but something. Inside, they dried off and built up the fire, trying to push back the chill that had nothing to do with weather. Lily made coffee with shaking hands while Caleb checked and rechecked the windows, the doors, every possible entry. "Maybe I should leave," he said suddenly. "Draw them off." "No." The cup clattered as she set it down hard. "We've discussed this. That was before nothing." She crossed to him, gripped his hands. "You think they'll leave me alone if you go? You heard Mrs. Henderson. I'm already suspect just for existing. At least together we can—" A sound outside cut her off. Not the wind, something metallic, like Caleb's cans striking together. They froze, listening. Another sound, closer. Deliberate footsteps on the porch, moving as one. They armed themselves, Lily taking the rifle, Caleb the shotgun. Without words, they took positions, covering the angles Thomas had once shown her for defending the house. A knock came, oddly polite given the circumstances. "Mrs. Morgan," a voice called. "Sheriff Daniels. Need to speak with you." Lily's eyes found Caleb's. The sheriff was a decent man, but duty-bound. If he'd come alone, they might talk their way out. If not— "Just a moment, Sheriff," she called back, proud of her steady voice. "Let me make myself presentable." She smoothed her still damp hair, pinched her cheeks for color. Caleb moved silently toward the back door, ready to flee or fight as needed, with a prayer to whoever might be listening. Lily opened the front door, rifle held casually but ready. Sheriff Daniels stood on the porch, water dripping from his slicker. Behind him, barely visible in the rain, were at least 3 more men. The storm had brought more than weather, and Lily knew with cold certainty that their fragile peace was about to shatter like glass under a boot heel. "Evening, Sheriff," she said calmly. "Terrible weather for a social call." Sheriff Daniels shifted uncomfortably on the porch, rain dripping from his hat brim. "Sorry to trouble you, Mrs. Morgan, but we've had reports of suspicious activity in these parts. Mind if we come in out of the weather?" Lily's grip tightened on the rifle, though she kept her expression neutral. "Reports? Some folks passing through claim they saw smoke from your chimney at odd hours, and tracks of more than one person around your property." His eyes were apologetic but watchful. "You know I have to follow up on these things." She forced a laugh. "Since when is it suspicious for a widow to keep irregular hours? Sleep doesn't come easy when you're alone." "Sheriff, I understand that, ma'am. But with the Brewster gang active, and that other business, that manhunt still ongoing, folks are jumpy." He paused meaningfully. "Some are saying you might have taken in help without telling anyone. The only help I've taken in is from the Almighty," Lily said firmly. "Though, if you know any honest ranch hands looking for work, I'd be obliged. The fence repairs are beyond me." One of the men behind the sheriff, a rough-looking deputy she didn't recognize, stepped forward. "Mind if we look around then, just to put folks' minds at ease?" Every instinct screamed danger. These weren't all local men. The deputy's accent was wrong. His gear too new. Bounty hunters, maybe, using the sheriff as cover for their search. "In this weather?" Lily let incredulity color her voice. "Sheriff Daniels, you know me. My husband's buried not 200 yards from here. You think I'd dishonor his memory by... What exactly are folks saying?" The sheriff had the grace to look ashamed. "No one's saying anything specific, ma'am. But these are dangerous times. If someone threatened you, forced you to shelter them, no one's forced me to do anything. That, at least, was pure truth. But you're welcome to check the barn if it'll help you sleep better. Though I warn you, the roof leaks something fierce in this rain." She saw the men exchange glances, calculating. They couldn't force their way in without cause, not with the sheriff present. But they wouldn't leave empty-handed either. "We'll just have a quick look around outside," the sheriff decided. "Boys, check the barn and outbuildings. Ma'am, I'll need you to stay here on the porch where I can see you." Lily's heart hammered, but she nodded calmly. Caleb would have heard every word. Would be moving now, using the storm as cover. She had to buy him time. "Would you like some coffee while your men get soaked?" she offered. "Seems the least I can do." "That's kind, but..." A crash came from the barn, followed by cursing. One of the deputies had found Caleb's makeshift quarters, or so it would seem. But Lily knew that sound, had helped plan it. Caleb had rigged a pile of old equipment to fall when disturbed, creating noise and distraction while he escaped through the hidden exit they'd cut in the back wall. "What in the..." The sheriff started down the steps, then remembered his duty. "You stay right there, Mrs. Morgan." More shouts from the barn. The men had found evidence of habitation, a bedroll, some tools, clear signs someone had been living there. Lily let real tears come to her eyes, not difficult given the circumstances. "Oh, Lord," she whispered, loud enough for the sheriff to hear. "Someone's been... Sheriff, I had no idea. I haven't been in the barn for days. The storm damage..." Sheriff Daniels studied her closely, torn between duty and his knowledge of her character. Before he could speak, gunfire erupted from beyond the barn. Not the sharp crack of rifles, but the deeper boom of a shotgun, followed by pistol fire. "Stay here." The sheriff drew his weapon, plunging into the rain toward the sound. Lily didn't hesitate. The moment he vanished into the darkness, she acted, not fleeing. That would confirm guilt. Instead, she dropped the rifle and ran after him, screaming like a frightened woman. "Sheriff, what's happening? Oh God, please!" She stumbled deliberately in the mud, going down hard. It wasn't entirely feigned. The fall knocked the breath from her. But it put her exactly where she needed to be, crawling through the mud toward the root cellar's hidden entrance. More gunfire. Closer now. A man's scream, not Caleb's voice. She was sure. The storm and darkness had become their ally. Confusion their weapon. She reached the cellar door, yanked it open. Strong hands pulled her inside, down into darkness. Caleb, muddy and bleeding from a gash on his forehead, but alive. He'd circled back for her, as she'd known he would. "You were supposed to run," she gasped. "So were you." He was already moving, lighting the lantern they'd prepared. The cellar connected to an old mine shaft, abandoned when Thomas first bought the property. They'd spent days clearing just enough of it to serve as an escape route. Above them, boots thundered across the floor of the house. Shouts, confusion, the sheriff's voice trying to restore order. They had minutes at most. "Can you ride?" Caleb asked, wrapping her wrist quickly where she'd scraped it in the fall. "Yes." "Good." He shouldered the pack they'd hidden here, supplies, ammunition, what money she'd saved. "Horses are saddled in the wash. We go fast and quiet. Use the storm." "Caleb Cross," the voice boomed from above. Definitely not the sheriff. "We know you're here. Come out now and the woman won't be harmed." They froze. The bounty hunters had shown their hand, which meant the pretense of legality was over. These men wouldn't leave witnesses. "They'll kill you anyway," Caleb said quietly. "Both of us. That's why we run." But Lily was already shaking her head. "No, they think I'm still outside. You go through the tunnel. I'll go back up. Play the hysterical woman. Say I was hiding from the shooting. Buy you time." "Absolutely not. You promised we were equals," she said fiercely. "This is my choice. And my choice is not to let you sacrifice yourself." He grabbed her hand. "We go together or not at all." Above them, furniture crashed. They were searching systematically now. And it wouldn't take long to find the cellar. Caleb blew out the lantern, and they felt their way into the tunnel. It was narrow, partially collapsed in places, forcing them to crawl. Lily's skirts caught and tore. Something scurried over her hand, rat or spider. She didn't care. Behind them, a triumphant shout. They'd found the cellar, boots on the ladder, voices echoing. Caleb pushed her faster, his body shielding hers from behind. The tunnel seemed endless, pressing down on all sides. Then, blessed air, rain on her face. They emerged behind a cluster of rocks 50 yards from the house. The horses waited as promised, already nervous from the gunfire. Caleb boosted her onto the mare, then swung up on the gelding. Lightning illuminated the scene behind them, men pouring from the house, torches somehow staying lit despite the rain. The sheriff's voice lost in the chaos. "Ride," Caleb commanded. And they did. They rode hard through the storm, using paths Caleb had scouted during his weeks of recovery. The rain was brutal, but also a blessing, washing away tracks almost as soon as they were made, behind them. Pursuit was quick but disorganized. The darkness that hid them also hid the treacherous terrain from their hunters. Lily's mare stumbled once, nearly going down. Caleb was there instantly, steadying both horse and rider, his face grim in a flash of lightning. They couldn't keep this pace, but they couldn't stop either. Finally, after what felt like hours, Caleb led them into a narrow canyon. Hidden beneath an overhang was a small cave, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. They dismounted, leading the exhausted horses inside. "How did you—" "Found it weeks ago," he said tersely, already working to unsaddle the animals. "Figured we might need a bolt hole." The cave was dry, stocked with firewood and some basic supplies. While Caleb tended the horses, Lily collapsed against the wall, shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Her home was gone, her life, her reputation, everything she'd built, destroyed in minutes. "Hey," Caleb knelt before her, cupping her face. "You're alive. We're alive. That's what matters. My home was just walls and wood. Home is—" He stopped, jaw working. Then, softer. "Home can be rebuilt. People can't be replaced." She looked at him through tears. This man who'd upended everything, who'd brought danger and salvation in equal measure. What now? Now we rest. Let the storm pass. Then we ride for Mexico. He pulled her against him, and she felt him trembling too. I'm sorry. Lily, you saved me, and I brought destruction to your door. No. She pulled back to look at him fiercely. Those men made their choices. The town made its choice. The only choice I regret is that we didn't leave sooner. He kissed her then, desperate and grateful and full of promises he might not be able to keep. When they broke apart, she saw her own determination reflected in his eyes. Outside, the storm raged on. But in their small shelter, they began planning. Mexico first, then maybe California. New names, new lives. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about loving Caleb Cross would ever be easy. But as she watched him carefully tend her scraped hands by firelight, she knew it would be worth it. Somewhere in the darkness, men still hunted them. Come dawn, they'd have to run again, staying ahead of the law and those who used it for their own ends. But tonight, in this cave that smelled of horses and rain, they had each other, and for now, that was enough to build a future on. The storm began to ease near dawn, and with it came decision time. Stay hidden and risk being found, or brave the open country while their pursuers might still be scattered. Caleb made the choice, as she'd known he would. We ride, he said simply, hard and fast for the border. Lily nodded, already repinning what remained of her hair, transforming herself from the widow Morgan into someone new. Someone who could love an outlaw and ride into an uncertain dawn without looking back. As they mounted up, she took one last look in the direction of her ranch, now lost in distance and darkness. Then she turned her horse south, toward whatever came next, riding beside the man who'd taught her that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the only one worth making. The abandoned prospector's shack sat crooked against the hillside, its walls bleached gray by years of desert sun. They'd been riding for 3 days, zigzagging through canyons and washes, doubling back on their own trail. Now, with the horses spent and danger still prowling somewhere behind them, this ramshackle shelter felt like salvation. Lily slid from her mare on trembling legs, every muscle screaming protest. Her hands were raw from the reins. Her fine widow's dress, now just rags, held together by determination. Caleb caught her elbow as she stumbled, his own exhaustion evident in the deep lines around his eyes. Just for a few hours, he said, though they both knew it might be their last stop before the final push to Mexico. Horses need rest. Inside, the shack was surprisingly intact. Mining tools hung on the walls, covered in dust and rust. A narrow cot stood in one corner, its mattress long since claimed by mice. Lily sank onto a wooden crate, watching Caleb secure the door and check the boarded windows for gaps. Here, he handed her the last of their water, barely 2 swallows. Share it, she insisted. They passed the canteen between them in silence, the water warm and metallic but precious as gold. Outside, the sun hammered down, turning the shack into an oven, but it was shelter, and they were together, and for now that had to be enough. Caleb knelt before her, gently examining her scraped palms. These need cleaning. With what water? She tried for levity, but her voice cracked. He produced a small flask from his vest, whiskey he'd been saving. This'll sting. It did, but she bit her lip and endured it. His hands were gentle despite their calluses, treating her wounds with the same care he'd shown when teaching her to shoot all those weeks ago. It felt like another lifetime. That ranch, that swing under the cottonwood tree, those stolen moments of peace. I've been thinking, she said as he wrapped her hands with strips torn from her petticoat. About Thomas. Caleb's hand stilled, but he didn't look up. Oh, he would have liked you. The admission surprised them both. He was a good man, but he was soft, always dreaming about tomorrow instead of preparing for it. He'd have admired your strength, your pragmatism. Lily, I need to say this. She touched his face, making him meet her eyes. I loved Thomas. Part of me always will. But loving him was easy, safe, loving you. She drew a shaky breath. Loving you is like loving a wildfire, dangerous and consuming and absolutely necessary. He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. You make me want things I can't have. A home, a future, the right to wake up beside you without checking for guns first. We could have that, in Mexico. No. His voice was gentle but firm. We both know Mexico's just another stopping place. Men like me don't get happy endings. Lily, the best I can hope for is to keep you safe long enough to— Stop! She pulled her hand free, anger flaring. Don't you dare. We've come too far for you to give up now. I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic. You're being a coward. The word hung between them like a challenge. Caleb's jaw worked, his eyes flashing with something that might have been hurt or anger or both. A coward, he repeated slowly. Maybe so. Coward enough to want you to live, even if it's not with me. And what kind of life would that be? She stood, pacing the small space. Going back to Copper Creek, marrying the blacksmith's son to restore my reputation, pretending I never knew what it felt like to be truly alive? Alive? He stood too, catching her shoulders. You call this living? Running, hiding, never knowing if today's the day they catch up. You deserve better. I deserve the truth. She shrugged off his hands. And the truth is, I was dying long before you came. Going through the motions, existing but not living. You changed that. I destroyed your life. You saved it. The words came out fierce, undeniable. I chose this, Caleb. Every step, every risk, every moment. Stop trying to protect me from my own decisions. They stood facing each other in the stifling heat, both breathing hard. Then Caleb's shoulders sagged, the fight going out of him. I can't lose you, he admitted roughly. Not after everything. Then stop trying to push me away. She stepped into his arms, and he held her like she might dissolve. They stayed that way, swaying slightly, drawing strength from each other. When he finally pulled back, his expression had changed, less guarded, more resolved. All right, he said. Together, whatever comes. Whatever comes, she echoed. They spent the afternoon planning, spreading Thomas's old map on the floor. The border was still 2 days' hard ride through hostile territory. Water would be scarce. Pursuit likely. But there was a mission just across the line, San Miguel del Desierto, where they might find sanctuary. After that? Lily asked. California, maybe, or a ship to South America. Somewhere far enough to start over. He traced routes with one finger. New names, new story. You could be a widow from back east. Come west for your health. I could be your foreman, hired for protection. Or, she said quietly, you could be my husband. His fingers stilled on the map. Lily, why not? We're already rewriting our lives. Why not write them the way we want? He looked at her with such naked longing it took her breath. You'd take my name, knowing what it means? I'd take any name if it meant being yours. The kiss that followed was different from all the others. Slower, deeper, sealed with promise rather than passion. When it ended, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. When we get to San Miguel, if there's a priest— Yes, she said before he could finish. Yes, to all of it. They allowed themselves to imagine it. A small ceremony in a mission chapel. New rings fashioned from whatever they could find. Vows spoken in broken Spanish but meaning every word. It was a foolish dream, perhaps, but it sustained them through the sweltering afternoon better than water might have. As dusk approached, Caleb checked outside. The horizon was clear, but dust devils danced in the distance. Could be natural, could be riders. Time to move. They packed quickly, efficiently. Lily had learned to travel light, to value ammunition over comfort. Her fine boots were ruined, replaced with Thomas's old work boots she'd grabbed in their escape. Her hair was braided tight, hidden under a man's hat Caleb had found in the shack. In the gathering darkness, she could pass for a young vaquero from a distance. Ready? Caleb asked. She checked the loads in her pistol, his training serving her well. Ready? They led the horses out, moving carefully in the twilight, The air was cooling, making travel easier but also carrying sound farther. Every coyote howl made them tense. Every shifting shadow could be danger. They'd gone perhaps a mile when Caleb suddenly reined in, holding up a hand. Lily froze, straining to hear whatever had alerted him. Then, hoofbeats, multiple riders, moving fast from the north. Without words, they urged their tired horses off the trail, seeking cover in a cluster of boulders. The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by voices carrying on the still air. Tracks led this way, clear as day. That was before the windstorm. Could be anywhere by now. Lily recognized the second voice, Jed Hawkins, one of Copper Creek's deputies. Her heart sank. These weren't random bounty hunters, but men who knew the territory, who'd be harder to evade. "Boss wants them alive, if possible," another voice said. "Especially the woman. Says she might know where Cross hid the money." "What money?" Hawkins asked. "From the Danforth job. Never was recovered." Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing tight. There was no money. Of course, he'd been innocent. But these men either didn't know or didn't care. They'd invented a reason to keep hunting that had nothing to do with justice. The riders passed within 50 yards of their hiding spot, dust and tobacco smoke drifting on the breeze. Lily held her breath, feeling Caleb coiled beside her like a spring. If they were discovered. But the riders continued on, their voices fading into the distance. Still they waited, counting heartbeats, until Caleb finally nodded. They emerged from cover, turning their horses southeast to angle away from the hunter's path. "They'll figure out they've lost us soon," Caleb murmured. "Double back to check the shack. Let them. We'll be long gone." They rode through the night, navigating by stars and instinct. The horses were flagging, and Lily knew they couldn't maintain this pace, but stopping meant risking capture. And capture meant she forced the thought away, 1 mile at a time, 1 breath at a time. Beside her, Caleb rode steady as granite, his presence the only constant in a world gone uncertain. Near dawn, they spotted it, a dark line on the horizon that meant the river, and beyond it, Mexico. Hope bloomed in Lily's chest. Dangerous as any desert flower, they were so close. That's when they heard it. A rifle shot, echoing across the flatlands. Then another. Their hunters had found the trail. "Ride!" Caleb shouted. All pretense of stealth abandoned, they gave the horses their heads, racing toward that distant line of salvation. Behind them, more shots, growing closer. Lily bent low over her mare's neck, Thomas's boots tight in the stirrups, praying to whoever might listen. The sun broke the horizon, painting everything in shades of blood and gold. The river grew closer, and with it the promise of a new life, a new chance. But the shots were closer too, and their exhausted horses were slowing, stumbling. "Almost there," Caleb called. "Just hold on," Lily wanted to answer, wanted to tell him she'd hold on forever if needed. But all her breath was for riding, for willing her brave mare to give just a little more. The thunder of pursuit filled her ears. Or maybe it was her own heartbeat. Either way, she rode toward the rising sun and whatever waited beyond. Caleb beside her, their shadows stretching long across the desert floor. The Rio Grande stretched before them, brown water moving deceptively fast between its banks. They'd made it, barely. Behind them, dust clouds marked their pursuers. Maybe 10 minutes back, Caleb's horse was limping, foam flecking its sides. Lily's mare wasn't much better. "Can they swim?" Lily gasped, eyeing the current. "Have to." Caleb was already dismounting, pulling her down. "Listen, if we get separated, we won't." She gripped his hand fiercely. "Together, remember!" Shouts echoed across the desert. Their hunters had spotted them. No time for plans or promises. They plunged into the river, leading the exhausted horses. The current was stronger than it looked, immediately pulling at Lily's heavy skirts. Water filled her boots, dragging her down. "Let go of the reins," Caleb shouted over the rush of water. "Grab my hand." She obeyed, trusting him as the river swept them downstream. Her mare swam strongly despite exhaustion. Instinct overcoming fear. The water was cold, muddy, tasting of distant mountains and closer dangers. Lily kicked hard, her skirts tangling around her legs like anchors. A shot cracked overhead. Then another. Their pursuers had reached the bank, firing from horseback. Water erupted near Caleb's head, too close. He pulled her lower, using the horses' bodies as shields. The far bank seemed impossibly distant. Lily's strength was failing, her waterlogged clothes pulling her under. Just when she thought she couldn't fight anymore. Her feet touched bottom. Mud. Blessed mud. And then they were stumbling up the Mexican bank, coughing and gasping. More shots, but distant now. Their hunters had stopped at the river's edge. International boundaries still meant something, even out here. For now. Move, Caleb urged, though he could barely stand himself. They might chance crossing after dark. They caught the horses, who stood shivering and blown, but alive. Everything they owned was soaked, but they were breathing free air on free soil. Lily wanted to cry from relief, exhaustion, a dozen emotions she couldn't name. Instead, she mounted up, following Caleb inland toward a line of cottonwoods that promised shelter. Every step took them farther from pursuit, closer to the new life they'd imagined. When they finally stopped, collapsing in the shade, the sun was high and their enemies were just specks on the far shore. "We did it," Lily breathed. Not yet. But Caleb was smiling, actually smiling. San Miguel's still a day south, then we'll have done it. They spent the afternoon drying what they could, sharing the last of their food. Hardtack gone soft with river water, but still sustaining. As the sun lowered, painting the Mexican desert in familiar shades of gold and red, they prepared to ride again. "Look," Caleb said suddenly, pointing north. Riders on the American side, clearly visible in the slanting light. But they weren't crossing. As Lily watched, they turned their horses, heading back the way they'd come. The chase was over. Whatever report they'd make, whatever lies they'd tell. Caleb Cross and Lily Morgan were beyond their reach. "It's finished," she said wonderingly. "No." Caleb mounted up, reached down to touch her cheek. "It's just beginning." They rode through the night again, but differently now. No frantic flight, just steady progress toward a goal. The stars looked the same on this side of the river, but everything felt changed. Lily found herself humming, something she hadn't done in months. San Miguel del Desierto appeared with dawn, adobe walls rising from the desert like a vision. The mission bell was ringing, calling the faithful to morning prayer. After days of violence and fear, the sound was almost unbearably sweet. The priest, Father Francisco, was ancient and kind, asking no questions about their bedraggled appearance or the haunted look in their eyes. He offered water, food, and most preciously, sanctuary. "We'd like to be married," Caleb said without preamble. "Today, if possible." The old priest's eyes twinkled. "Ah, young love, so impatient." His English was accented but clear. "You have papers? No? Well, God's love needs no documents." It wasn't the wedding Lily had imagined as a girl. No white dress, no flowers, no gathering of family and friends. She wore a borrowed peasant blouse and skirt from the priest's housekeeper. Caleb had scraped the trail dust from his clothes, but still looked more outlaw than groom. But when they stood before the simple altar, when Caleb took her hands in his and spoke vows in a voice rough with emotion, none of that mattered. The words were in Spanish, which neither fully understood, but the meaning transcended language. To have and to hold, for better or worse, till death. "I, Caleb, take you, Lily. I, Lily, take you, Caleb." Father Francisco wrapped their joined hands with his stole, blessing them in the name of a God who, apparently, looked kindly on outlaws and runaway widows. When he pronounced them married, Caleb kissed her with such tenderness that tears finally came, washing away the last of her fear. "Señora Cross," the priest said with a gentle smile, "may you find peace in your new life." They spent 3 days at the mission, recovering strength and making plans. Father Francisco knew people, had connections. For a small donation, most of their remaining money, he arranged new papers. William and Mary Carson, heading west to California to start a ranch. Close enough to the truth to remember, far enough to stay safe. William? Caleb, Will now, made a face. Really? Would you prefer Bartholomew? Lily, Mary, teased. It was strange, using these new names, but also freeing, like shedding an old skin. On their last night, they climbed to the Mission Bell Tower to watch the sunset. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but it no longer felt like a trap. It felt like possibility. Any regrets? Will asked, his arm around her. Mary considered, somewhere north. Her ranch stood empty, or maybe burned by now. The townspeople of Copper Creek would be spinning stories about the widow Morgan who ran off with a killer. Her reputation was destroyed. Her old life erased as surely as if she'd died. None, she said, meaning it. You? Only that I didn't find you sooner. They were quiet then, watching the light fade. Tomorrow they'd start the long journey to California. There would be challenges. Building a new life always was. They'd need work, a place to live, a way to exist in the world without constantly looking over their shoulders. But tonight, they had this, each other, a new name, and the whole future spreading before them like an unwritten page. Tell me about California, Mary said. What it'll be like. Will pulled her closer. Green hills and ocean breezes. Gold in the streams if we're lucky. Good soil if we're not. Cities growing so fast nobody asks where you came from. A place to disappear and reappear as whoever we want to be. And who do you want to be? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, yours, just yours. A man who comes home to his wife each evening without fear, who builds things instead of hunting them, who gets to love you in daylight. Not just stolen moments. That's a lot to want. Then I'll work for it, every day until it's real. They climbed down as darkness fell, hand in hand, careful of the worn steps. At the bottom, Will suddenly stopped. What is it? He pulled something from his pocket, the wooden whistle he'd carved all those weeks ago. Forgot I still had this, kept it all through. He gestured vaguely at the chaos behind them. Seems foolish now. No. Mary took it, ran her fingers over the smooth wood. It's perfect. Our first piece of home. We'll have a real home again, he promised. Better than before. Different than before, she corrected. But ours. They walked back to their small room, the whistle safe in Mary's pocket. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A week's hard travel to reach California. They'd arrive with almost nothing. No money, no connections, no certainty except each other. But they'd arrive together, bound by more than just words spoken before an old priest. Bound by choice, by trial, by a love that had survived pursuit and prejudice and the violence of desperate men in their borrowed bed. They held each other close. No longer fugitives, but simply newlyweds facing an uncertain future. Outside, coyotes called across the desert, the same lonely sound that had haunted Lily's nights at the ranch. But now, with Will's heartbeat steady under her hand, the sound seemed less mournful, more like a blessing. Wild things calling to wild things, free beneath the stars. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. And I love you, he answered. Whatever comes, she agreed, and meant it. They'd left everything behind, names, homes, the lives they'd built before finding each other, but lying there in the mission's shelter, listening to the desert night, Mary Carson knew they'd gained more than they'd lost. A chance, a choice, a future written by their own hands. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The Carson Ranch sat nestled in a valley 20 miles east of Sacramento, its modest frame house facing the sunrise. 2 years had passed since William and Mary Carson arrived in California with nothing but determination and each other. Now, as Mary stood on her porch, a proper porch this time, with carved railings Will had made himself, she could hardly believe how far they'd come. Letter came. Will called from the barn, waving an envelope. Mary's heart skipped. Mail was rare, usually meaning news from the world they'd left behind. She met him halfway across the yard, noting how the California sun had bronzed his skin. how labor had broadened his shoulders. He looked nothing like the wounded outlaw she'd dragged into her cellar 3 years ago. The letter bore no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Mary's hands trembled as she opened it. "Dear Mrs. Morgan," she read aloud. "Or should I say Mrs. Carson? Don't worry, your secret is safe. I'm writing to tell you that certain matters have been resolved. A man named Jake Morrison was killed trying to rob a bank in Tucson last month. Before he died, he confessed to several crimes, including the murder of the Danforth family. The territorial governor has issued a full pardon for Caleb Cross, clearing his name completely. I thought you should know, in case you ever ran across him in your travels. May God bless you in your new life. Your friend, Samuel Daniels, Sheriff, retired." Will sank onto the porch steps, his face unreadable. Mary sat beside him, taking his hand. "You're free," she whispered. "Truly free. Samuel knew all along," Will said wonderingly. "He helped us that night, made sure those bounty hunters didn't follow too close. Good men do what they can." Mary reread the letter, then carefully folded it. "You could go back to your real name now. Be Caleb Cross again." Will was quiet for a long moment, watching their small herd of cattle graze in the pasture. Then he lifted her hand, kissing the simple gold band they'd bought with his first wages as a ranch hand. "No," he said firmly. "Caleb Cross was a hunted man with nothing to lose. William Carson has a wife, a home, a life worth living. I know which one I choose." "Are you sure?" He pulled her close, and she breathed in the familiar scent of hay and honest work. "The past is past. Let it rest with Thomas and all the others we've been." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. The ranch wasn't much, 40 acres bought cheap from a failed gold miner, but it was theirs. Every fence post, every planted tree, every small improvement was a promise made real. "I should tell you," Mary said eventually. "I went to see Dr. Martinez yesterday." Will tensed. "Are you ill?" "No." She took his hand, placed it flat against her belly. "Quite the opposite." The transformation of his face, from fear to understanding to pure joy, was something she'd remember forever. He pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at once, spinning her around until she protested. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Due in spring. Doctor Martinez says I'm healthy as a horse. We'll need to add on to the house, build a proper nursery. He stopped, cupping her face. "Are you happy?" "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." They spent the morning making plans, Will sketching additions to the house while Mary calculated what they could afford. It was a far cry from their desperate flight across the desert, this gentle domestic planning, but no less precious for its ordinariness. That afternoon, they rode into Sacramento for supplies. The city was booming, new buildings rising everywhere. No one gave them a second glance, just another ranching couple come to town. At the general store, Mary selected fabric for baby clothes while Will priced lumber. "Mr. Carson," a voice called. "Heard you might be looking for hands come harvest time." It was Jim Turner, a neighboring rancher. Will had helped him repair his barn last month, refusing payment but earning respect. "Might be." Will allowed. "Know any good men?" "My nephew's coming out from Missouri. Good worker, keeps his mouth shut. I'll send him your way." After Turner left, Mary squeezed Will's arm. "Look at you, respectable rancher Carson, hiring hands. Don't get too excited, we can barely afford one. We'll manage. We always do." That evening, they visited the small cemetery where they'd buried their past. Not literally. There were no graves for Lily Morgan or Caleb Cross. But they'd planted a rose bush in the corner, their private memorial to who they'd been. The roses bloomed red now, vibrant with life. "Think they'd recognize us?" Mary asked. "The people we were? I hope so." Will picked a rose, tucked it behind her ear. "I hope they'd be proud." Back home, as Mary prepared dinner, she found herself humming the same tune she'd hummed that last night fleeing toward Mexico. but different now. No longer defiant, but content. Will appeared in the doorway, holding something. Found this in the barn. Thought you might want it. It was the wooden whistle he'd carved, carefully cleaned and polished. Mary took it, tears pricking her eyes. You kept it all this time? It was home when we had none. Seemed wrong to lose it now that we do. She kissed him then, tasting promises kept and futures building. When they finally sat down to dinner, simple fare but theirs, she placed the whistle on the mantel between their few books and the daguerreotype they'd had made on their first anniversary. I've been thinking about names, she said, for the baby. Oh? What kind of names? Thomas for a boy, after someone who deserved better than he got. Sarah for a girl. Will's breath caught. Sarah, the name he'd mumbled in his fever dreams. The child from the Danforth family he'd been accused of killing. You sure? New life honoring lost life. Seems fitting somehow. Sarah Carson, he said softly. Thomas Carson. Good, strong names. For a good, strong life. After dinner, they sat on their swing. Yes, Will had built another swing. First thing after the house was finished. The evening was mild, stars beginning to appear in the California sky. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called, but the sound no longer meant danger, just wildness existing alongside civilization, each in its place. No regrets? Will asked. Their old question. Mary's hand found his, fingers interlacing with practiced ease, in her belly. New life grew, in their barn. Cattle lowed contentedly. Tomorrow would bring work, fences to mend, crops to tend, a future to build board by board and season by season. But tonight was for this. Two people who'd found each other across impossible odds, sitting quiet in the peace they'd earned. None, she said, and meant it more than ever. You? Only one. She looked at him, worried. What? That I can't go back and tell that man bleeding in your cellar that it would be worth it. Every hard mile, every close call, every sacrifice, worth it for this. He knows, Mary said softly. Somewhere deep down, he knew. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs alike. But below them, in a modest house on a small ranch, two people held tight to their improbable happiness. They'd been refined by fire, tested by trials that would have broken lesser souls, but they'd emerged not just intact but stronger, bound by more than law or paper could make them. In the barn, horses stamped and settled. In the house, a clock ticked toward bedtime. Simple sounds of a simple life, made precious by how close they'd come to losing any life at all. I love you, Mrs. Carson, Will murmured into the darkness. And I love you, Mr. Carson, Mary replied. Forever and always, forever and always, he agreed. As they rose to go inside, Mary paused at the door, looking back at their land, bought honest and held free. No one hunted them here, no past chased their heels. They were who they chose to be, nothing more or less. The screen door closed behind them with a gentle click. Inside, lamplight made the small rooms golden. Will banked the fire while Mary wound the clock, their movements synchronized by practice and affection. Soon they'd climb the stairs to their bed, in their house, on their land. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, as all tomorrows did, but tonight was theirs, and it was good. In the spring, when Sarah Carson was born healthy and strong, her first toy was a wooden whistle, worn smooth by loving hands. She'd grow up free beneath the California sun, never knowing hunger or flight or the weight of other names. That was her parents' gift to her, a clean slate, a fresh start, a life unburdened by the past, and sometimes, on quiet evenings, her parents would sit on their porch swing and remember another porch, another swing, another life. But those memories brought no sorrow now, only gratitude for the journey that had led them home. Home, the sweetest word in any language, made all the sweeter for how hard they'd fought to find it. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just as Lily and Caleb connected across the harsh desert. Subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, redemption, and courage in the American frontier, and share your thoughts on their journey. Did you believe in their love? Would you have made the same choices? Your stories matter too. Partners,